Welcome to King County Connects, where we connect you with some of the important issues in the county and in our region. I'm Enrique Cerna. Access to affordable health care, transportation for low-income citizens, disproportionality in the justice system. What is King County doing about some of these root causes of inequities? We're talking today to the director of the county's Office of Equity and Social Justice, Matias Valenzuela. Welcome, good to have you here.
Thank you, Enrique.
Let's step back here. A little history as to how all of this started and the idea behind it. It actually goes back several years.
It does go back several years. I mean, in the last year especially, there's been a lot of interest and attention on racial inequities and police violence and those issues, but this is something that the county has really been taking on for a while now. And it really launched as an initiative back in 2008 under our previous executive, Ron Sims. And really for him, I think we have to give a lot of credit to the work that he did around this. And really for him, it was a legacy issue. One of the things that happened for him, he was actually was part of a release, and I think he was out on the East Coast, in which they released a national report that was called the Dellums Commission Report, which looked at young men of color in a number of different domains in terms of health, criminal justice, education, portrayal in the media. And he was very impacted by that national report. And he came back and actually asked us in the county in a number of different departments, let's look at how we are looking in terms of communities of color here locally in the county. And to really the dismay of many, we very much mirrored the situation that was going on at the national level. So as a result, that was around 2006, 2007, that plus some other work that was happening, for example, within the health department, a lot of work happening around health inequities and health disparities. We launched in early 2008, really as an executive initiative, King County Equity and Social Justice.
Is it unusual, this type of effort to address inequities and social justice issues for a government to step forward and do this, a county government to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we started, it was very rare. I mean, the city of Seattle has a race and social justice initiative. A few places have started to do some work around that. Now it's much more common. But really, actually, in 2008, when we started, it was quite rare, and we were really on the cutting edge of this, and especially to have it as a countywide effort in which you have all the elected leadership behind it as well. It's pretty extraordinary. Usually it's within a particular section or a particular department, or it's more community-led. But here to actually have the local county government really being a lead on this, it's not what you tend to see. And so a lot of times when I'm traveling nationally in other places, they say, you have what? You have an Office of Equity and Social Justice, and you're working to do what around your organizational practices? They're pretty blown away by it.
And do you have other county governments and other entities giving you a call, say, what are you doing?
Oh yeah, we have it all the time, and there's new offices now that are being established. For example, in the city of Oakland, they just now with the new year are starting up a new office on racial equity. There is not a week that goes by in which when I don't take a phone call or meet with people from another part of the country that they really want to hear how we're doing. Because what's happened since that early phase that I was telling you about in 2008 to now in 2010, we've gone further. We've really been institutionalizing it, integrating it into our organization in terms of our strategic plan. We actually passed an ordinance in 2010, which was passed unanimously by county council, that really made this the law of the county. So now we actually have, by law, that we have to look at how do we really implement and incorporate equity into our policies and decisions, into our organizational practices, how we work with communities. So it's become something that we're really trying to instill in the fabric of the organization.
Is this also taking a look at what, we hear the term institutionalized racism, and but it's tough for some people to understand what that's all about.
Yeah.
But the fact is, in entities like government and education and all these things, if you break down certain things, certain barriers, they're there.
Yeah, exactly. And so I mean, some of the things that we have and the inequities that we see in our society and in King County itself, they're not naturally occurring. The fact that you have an African American who is, the rate of unemployment, for example, is twice as high among African Americans as compared to whites. Or if you look at median household income among African Americans, it's half of what it is for whites. Or if you look at something like life expectancy, the fact that among some ethnic and racial groups you have a 10-year difference by race, or even the fact that based on where you live. So whether you live in Mercer Island or Medina or some parts of the east side compared to whether you live in some areas of South King County, there's a 10-year difference in life expectancy. Those aren't natural occurring differences. They just are not happening on their own. Those are done and are the results of some decisions and practices and things that we have done, local government being part of that. But also it's around businesses, it's also around what's happened in the school systems. So it's very, very much comprehensively all being part of this particular, creating this problem. So in fact, we're all should be part of creating the solutions around these as well, and really intentionally looking at how we have created some decisions to benefit some, and at the end have not benefited others, right? And yeah, I mean, if thinking about institutional racism and structural racism, these are very much part of the issue and the problems. They are things that play out at the interpersonal level. They're things that play out at the institutional level, and then structurally as well too, which is throughout all the different institutions and elements of society. They work together. Yeah. And some of it is more explicit. The majority is more implicit, and it's just how we get used to seeing things function. So part of this work is providing some of the tools and ways of analyzing things and looking at the data and being very thoughtful about how we do things in a different way to get different results.
Now, under Dow Constantine, you've gone from the idea that was implemented by Ron Sims, brought that to the table. Now you're in the implementation phase because he wants something done.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great point. And just as how our previous executive Ron Sims was so visionary, I think our current executive Dow Constantine is just as equal of a champion of this, and wanting to make sure that we do it well, do it right, and also integrates it with many of the other things that we're trying to do in the county around being best run government and being lean and efficient and those kinds of things. So really, equity and social justice is not, and love the way that he actually tries to incorporate this, is saying it needs to be part of everybody's job. So, the fact that I think even he had some, one of the reservations, because the office that I direct now is relatively new. It's been around for a little bit over a year. And before we did have an initiative, and we did have this work that was happening, and it was really more decentralized. But now one of the concerns about having an office is, well, great, it's where we have some of the central structure and support and assistance that we can provide to people, but we don't want to give the impression that it's, now the office is going to take care of it. It really needs to be part of everybody's work. So we have 13,000 employees, people that work in project management, they work with the public, they work in customer service, they engage different communities. And this needs to be part of everybody's work. So he's been very much critical in making sure that that everybody is held accountable to this. And it also gets seen as something that is kind of central to all the other things that are, the key priorities for us in terms of best run government, that it's, and be creating an efficient and a well-run organization, because really addressing equity and social justice is about creating good government. It's about going to the root causes of issues. It's about serving the communities better. And it's really about addressing the needs and better responding to our communities and to our employees. I mean, a critical part, we've been talking about making sure that we serve the public a lot here, and that is key, and serving the community, and that is key. But it's also, how do we establish an organization and a workforce that is diverse and agile and really best responds to the needs of our community. So that's also, we have a a workforce that in certain ways is aging, it's majority white, to be able to really, the nation is going to be majority people of color by 2043. We're going to get to that number, majority people of color, about 10 years sooner than the rest of the nation.
Oh, really? Here in
Yeah,
King County.
so we need to, here in the King County, right? So we need to make sure, and how do we prepare our organization to be ready to serve the public and look like the public at all levels of the organization, because we are actually, we've historically done a good job, especially in some of the frontline positions, maybe even the bus drivers or some of the workers that work and serve the public in their clinics, of hiring people of color. But how do we make sure to develop those pipelines in those places where we can get diversity throughout the organization? Because that's really what it's going to take.
Well, let's talk about some of the areas here. One of the big areas is affordability, and not only are we talking about income, but also we're talking about housing, we're talking about health care. Mm-hmm. What are the issues that we face there, and trying to make sure that we can increase that?
Around healthcare in particular?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we took on in the county as a priority in the last few years, especially with the Affordable Care Act and some of the opportunities there. Our work is very much data driven, and when we look at the maps of the county and we look where we have people who are unemployed, it's the same thing as I was saying in terms of kind of income and life expectancy. We have some areas, or we had before the Affordable Care Act, some areas where we have maybe 3% uninsured. Some areas are over 30% uninsured. So what we did with that particular effort, and we were successful in really so far reducing the number and percentage of uninsured from about 16% to about 10%, so pretty significant, but really focusing on those areas and those populations that have the greatest needs, and focusing, for example, in South King County, and focusing on those ethnic groups that have some of the greatest needs.
There's a real shift there because of affordability here.
Right.
With the fact that Seattle has become so expensive.
Yes.
And gentrification and things like that have pushed communities of colors.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And there's a wonderful actual book that came out by Brookings Institution that they looked at King County, and it's called The Suburbanization of Poverty, in which one of the analysis they do there is how still, like, federal funds disproportionately still go to Seattle compared to South King County, where we have some of the greatest needs. So generally, our institutions and our governments haven't kept up with the need. Some of the greatest needs that we have here in terms of our populations, in terms of income and other areas, are in South King County in particular. And that's where we've seen a lot of the demographic shift as parts of Seattle have become more and more unaffordable. So it's how do we actually also shift our focus and our attention in those areas where we have some of the greatest needs. So really trying to work with some of those local cities and working in those unincorporated areas to really target those areas. So really going back to the example we were talking about, health insurance and affordability there, or getting people covered. We were very thoughtful in working with a network of organizations, and we continue to be, and who actually are also competent in those languages and working with those populations, so they would do the outreach. And with that particular effort too, we took a all hands on board approach in terms of getting all the departments. Usually we think about things in a very siloed way. Public health takes care of health, transportation does transportation. But we said, hey, we need to have everybody actually be part of this effort. So we had all department agencies and departments say, this is a great opportunity for us, and getting everybody saying, how can we get people insured? So, the courts and elections and other agencies and departments in the county outside of public health were actually working on getting people signed up.
They really
We're
are.
all intertwined, yeah. And what we bring in with the equity and social justice work too is beyond some of the analysis and looking at some of the root causes and some of the tools and things like that, is actually breaking down some of these, bringing the silos that tend to exist, and thinking about, we've developed within the county, and as one of our frameworks, we call them the Determinants of Equity, which are the 14 conditions that we say everybody needs to have access to. And they include good paying jobs, but they also include health and quality education and housing and quality transportation. And our region has seen some interesting developments, for example, around wages and minimum wage. That's great, but if you don't take care of some of the other issues around education, around affordable housing, around transportation, your people are not going to have access to the quality of life that we want people to have. So really, with our approach, it's about looking at all of these issues, comprehensively and addressing them.
Let's talk about transportation, because one of the focuses has been on making sure there's some affordability for bus fares, because so many people depend on buses these days. Even though you wouldn't know it by all our traffic problems, but but there's a focus there to try to deal with that.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that we've done with transportation. I mean, one is actually included equity as one of the guidelines too for even bus allocations, which before we used to have more of these geographic kinds of formulas in terms of folks getting similar kinds of services geographically, and now actually low-income communities and communities of color is a factor in this. So how do that becomes a factor in route allocation. So when we're either doing a cutback or doing an enhancement of services, we need to think about where those communities live, because if you have somebody in an area with resources, you cut off bus services, they're more likely to be able to, maybe drive because they have a car, or their neighbor, maybe already commutes and they can just hop on with them. So really thinking about this as a kind of central approach in terms of how we develop, our policies, our plans, and deliver services. But yeah, the thing that happened in the latest, when we had to increase the fares generally, given some of the expenses that were happening here in the county, there's this concern, okay, we have this equity and social justice work that we're doing, and we know that some populations are going to be disproportionately affected by this, and a raise in fares is going to really impact them. So what we did, and it was one of the first in the nation, is introduced a reduced fare option. So if you earn 200% over the federal poverty level or below, you get a reduced fare. So that is an innovative way to think about how can we get money back into people's pockets. Because that's going to be, sometimes it's just another $1 or $1.50, but actually for somebody who's trying to scrape by and having, with a lot of other expenses that you tend to have, I mean, that adds up to have, a few dollars a day to have to spend additionally on transportation. So things like that, thinking about how we can make sure that those people that have some of the greatest needs get a little bit of relief.
Much talk about issues of concern about the disproportionality in the criminal justice system, as well as in the juvenile justice system. What are we facing there?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that has been written about this particular issue, and it's an issue that
it's a hot button issue.
It's a hot button issue, it's not an easy issue. I mean, we in King County, when we look at disproportionality in youth incarceration, for example, we see that they're very significant, that a youth of color can be anywhere from 5 to 10 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white youth. You can think about it just as kind of the incarceration issue per se, or you can start to see about, okay, what are all the things that lead up to that? So what is even happening in early childhood education, for example, that leads to it? What's happening in the schools and in school discipline policies? Then what is happening with police and in policing, and the way that they, unevenly treat certain youth versus others, and that's what is happening in the criminal justice system at all levels. And we know, and going back to the issue that we were referring to before in terms of, institutional racism and structural racism, we know that there are practices, both mainly unintended or unintentional. But they have some of these consequences that are producing unequal outcomes for folks. So really it's looking at all these different systems, and that's one of the efforts that we have in the county, is to look at disproportionality in the youth justice system, but bringing in the advocates of people that work with youth, but then people and the superintendents and the police chiefs, and at all the different levels, because it needs a community-wide response in order to be able to address it. and even critically, and that's why some of the work like with the new Best Starts for Kids is extremely important, is really youth, especially in those 0 to 5 years, need to have a very strong base and strong early childhood education and development, because we know if children don't get the support they need in those first years of life, they're going to be a step back already. So really trying to work both within the systems and the institutions that we have in place, but then also thinking about what are the things that we need for our children for tomorrow so they can really succeed.
Is it hard to bring about change in these areas? Because as we mentioned, we bring up the term being institutionalized as far as thinking is concerned, and about how to get people to look at things differently in different areas and to actually then act.
Yeah, it's extremely hard. I mean, I spend a lot of my time doing trainings, doing presentations, working with groups, but we have a lot of learned behaviors and ways that we do our work and are used to doing things. And in many ways, they work quite well. And, we go and do our job from 9 to 5 or whatever it may be and go home. And you produce your numbers and you produce your outcomes, and folks say, hey, yeah, nice work. You're being good, you're being efficient, whatever it may be. So that's why, I think this work, the equity work, is different in the sense that it's both, it's both heart and mind, and you need to think differently, but you also actually have to open up your heart to different ways of listening. And working with people and establishing new relationships, and working with community in a different way and working with our employees in a different way, listening, so we tend to, there are a lot of things that we have developed in our way of working that are based on not the best behaviors, in terms of being productive and whatever it may be. We need to stop and think, and a part of this too, and that's why we develop tools, is to actually because we have equity impact review tools, we have community tools too in terms of how to better engage communities. It's an intentional process. So if I can't sit in my desk or my cubicle and say I'm going to be equitable today, and you get a problem and I expect you're going to get a different result just because you're sitting there. You need to actually bring in data, and okay, what is the issue and what is it telling us, and where are we seeing some unequal, outcomes? You need to bring in some content experts, maybe some policy experts. You need to bring in the voice of the communities, so you listen to what they really are talking about in terms of the problems, and that's when we get to the really root causes of problems, because we need to be able to address the correct problems, and then also bring in effectively your staff. I think there's a lot of folks, and we have a particular way of often valuing kind of the expert or folks in a particular level of the hierarchy in an organization. But this is really also about valuing and seeing all of our employees as leaders. So the fact that we have some folks who have frontline experience or having that particular discussion, interaction with the public or with customers in particular, they have a lot of insight. So how can we actually tap that information? Because we haven't always used that information in a very effective way to come up with new solutions. So it's not an easy process, right? It takes a lot of years of change and cultural change too, in terms of advancing the organization.
You mentioned that you do training. So what do you do? What's the message? What's the approach to try to? Because it seems to me that what you're having to deal with is that you can give a lot of data, which is probably very important, but it's also a matter of kind of changing some attitudes.
Yeah. So and every individual and every group is different. So that's why I say it's a little bit both the hearts and minds. You have to have some of the stories, so you can actually share the experiences and what people are living right now. I think the data is extremely important. Very early in our work, we relied a lot on data because we were actually trying to understand the issues a little bit more. And I think now we've moved beyond just just looking at the data. And it's whichever area you look, you come by race and by place, you see huge differences in our county as you do nationally. So you can spend a lot of time doing that, right? So we have focused a lot, especially early on some of the data, but we're moving beyond that. And really, the more we get folks to be thinking about really some of the tools and some of the approaches and what works, and trying to create a learning organization in which you can actually begin to try some things differently and not being afraid to fail, because there's no necessarily a roadmap of how to do this equity work. You know, sometimes I talk to folks with in other jurisdictions, and they call us and they say, okay, well, you know, you've passed an equity and social justice ordinance. You know, can we see it? And you know, how can we pass one here? It's like, well, you know, every jurisdiction is different, and every city or county is different, or state, and you really need to start from your current situation and what works and what resonates. So really, when we do trainings and we do these things, it really varies. I mean, some groups need some very basic information around language access, for example. You know, let's say we have inspectors that are going out to different establishments, whether they're in plumbing or they're in food establishments. One of the things that we have done is provide some basic training so they actually know how to access phone interpreters. So, you know, many times they're out and dealing with Chinese or Vietnamese or Spanish-speaking establishment and some, business owner. And there might be some challenges there, and we say, okay, well, actually, there can be some very effective ways of beginning to address this. So there's some very concrete things that can be done, really, but depends on the issue. But then when we're talking about in our budget area, we do actually a very different training and different process for the budget area. We have an equity impact review tool, but then have developed some budget tools for equity. So people are able to think about, both within departments and the budget analyst, to do an analysis about, okay, there's a particular change in the budget, or we're proposing a particular change of budget, who benefits, who doesn't? How are low-income communities benefiting, communities of color, immigrant refugee populations benefiting, and if they're not, what are we doing to mitigate the effects of that? So it's a very specific situation for that problem. So people need a little bit of a baseline, education around some of these things, and then some very specific things for whatever area that they're doing. So I don't have a cookie cutter approach. It's really about, okay, what area do you work in? What kind of work do you do?
And how do you apply it then?
How do we apply it for your work? Exactly.
In the community.
Yeah.
What do you see as the greatest challenge here going ahead?
For a while it was institutionalizing this and making sure that we have the kind of the long-term commitment to this that I think is necessary, and I think we have that now. For a while I was very concerned about that maybe we were going to have a different administration at some point coming in, and things are not going to have that level of will the commitment continue? And will the commitment continue? Because we've started to do some really great work. I think we have that. We have that now, and that is happening. I just hope we continue to have the level of attention and interest to this that we now have moving forward too. I mean, right now, I think this last year, 2015, the level of attention around racial equity issues was extremely high. Just given some of the national things that were happening. And I just hope that level, so now we have the institutional attention to this, which I think is great. I think we just need to continue the community-wide attention to it and not let our foot off the accelerator.
Right. I don't think things are going to really change a great deal. We've got a lot of work to go when dealing with issues of race, justice, and democracy. So
I mean, the nation has, it's what, over 200 years of history and it took a long time to create some of our current conditions. Right. It's going to take a lot of time to make some of those changes. So I think we need to have a long-term vision and be very patient.
At least we got to start. All right. Matias Valenzuela, the Director of the County's Office of Equity and Social Justice, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it very much. And thanks for joining us today. Please visit us online at kingcounty.gov, KCTV, and we'll see you next time. I'm Enrique Cerna.